$29.9 million went to a technology company called Palantir, just weeks after a man with no official government title arranged for the Secretary of Homeland Security to meet with that company's representatives. And here's the part that should make your jaw drop. The man who arranged those meetings, the man who multiple sources confirm is actually architecting ICE strategy despite having no official leadership role, the man who told DHS officials to give Palantir additional work, does not have to fill out a single financial disclosure form because of a loophole in federal employment law that allows him to operate completely in the shadows while brokering government contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. Corey Lewandowski is a familiar name as he worked as a senior advisor for Donald Trump's 2024 election campaign before becoming a special government employee, as designated by the government. And that designation is where this story gets truly infuriating for anyone who cares about government accountability. Special government employees are limited to 130 working hours per year under federal regulations, which sounds like a reasonable limitation until you understand that multiple independent sources have confirmed to journalists that Lewandowski works far more than that limit, and that he simply lies about his hours to circumvent the restriction entirely. But the working hours deception isn't even the most concerning part of this arrangement, because as a special government employee, Lewandowski does not have to fill out financial disclosure forms. This means all of his private business deals remain completely unmonitored while he simultaneously exercises enormous influence over who gets government contracts at the Department of Homeland Security. This is exactly the kind of conflict of interest that financial disclosure laws were specifically designed to prevent. And yet the loophole in the special employee designation creates a perfect mechanism for corruption to operate in plain sight. An Axios reporter spotted Lewandowski at Reagan National Airport just last week, discussing DHS contracts with representatives from Palantir, which would be suspicious enough on its own. But the Wall Street Journal had already reported that Lewandowski arranged for Kristi Noem to meet with Palantir last year, and weeks after those meetings, the Department of Homeland Security updated an existing contract to give Palantir an additional $29.9 million in funding. When confronted about this pattern, officials have claimed that Lewandowski has never worked with Palantir, but the paper trail of meetings arranged and contracts awarded tells a very different story than the official denials being offered. The question that should be on everyone's mind is, how does someone with no official relationship to a company, no formal government title that would give him authority over contracts, and no financial disclosure requirements that would reveal potential conflicts of interest end up being the person who arranges meetings between that company and cabinet-level officials right before millions of dollars flow to that company through updated government contracts? Multiple sources have confirmed to journalists that Corey Lewandowski, not Kristi Noem, is actually the architect of ICE and their current enforcement strategy. This means the real power at the Department of Homeland Security is being exercised by someone who has no official leadership role, no accountability to Congress, no financial disclosure requirements, and apparently no respect for the working hour limitations that are supposed to govern his position. Todd Lyons, who serves as the acting director of ICE, has threatened to quit on multiple occasions due to the pressure he faces from Lewandowski and Noem. Sources within the agency describe an environment where unofficial advisors exercise outsized influence over the contracting process. NBC News has reported that the reason DHS hasn't been able to expand detention space has nothing to do with Todd Lyons as acting director, but more to do with Lewandowski and Noem's roles having this outsized influence over how contracts get awarded. This means the administration's failure to deliver on key immigration enforcement promises can be traced directly back to the dysfunction created by this unofficial power structure operating alongside, but often in conflict with, the official chain of command. Now we need to discuss the part of this story that explains why Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, would allow someone with no official title to exercise this much power over her department. The answer has been reported by Jonathan Karl, the New York Post, New York Magazine, and the Daily Beast, among other outlets. Corey Lewandowski and Kristi Noem are engaged in what multiple sources describe as a long-time extramarital affair, and both of them are married to other people with children. This creates exactly the kind of personal dependency that can make exposure threatening to all parties involved, and therefore provides leverage that keeps the arrangement in place. Stories have emerged about Lewandowski demanding hotel rooms close to Noem even when he was traveling with his own family members. Noem has come into conflict with other members of the Trump administration, specifically over her refusal to distance herself from Lewandowski despite the obvious problems his presence creates. The romantic relationship between these two individuals has essentially become the mechanism through which an unaccountable political operative exercises power over a major federal department. The personal entanglement makes it nearly impossible for normal institutional checks to function because the secretary herself is protecting the person who should be under oversight. When Kristi Noem was recently asked about a federal court order restricting the use of chemical agents by immigration enforcement, she gave a response that perfectly encapsulates the gaslighting that characterizes this administration's approach to questions about their actions. Noem said that the federal order was a little ridiculous because the federal judge told them they couldn't do what they already aren't doing, the kind of statement designed to make you feel like you've been exposed to what one commentator called a highly contagious case of stupid. She then claimed that chemical agents are only used when there's violence happening and perpetuating, and you need to establish law to keep people safe. But the very existence of a federal court order suggests that judges who have reviewed the evidence came to very different conclusions about when and how these agents are being deployed than the public statements from DHS would indicate. What we're witnessing at the Department of Homeland Security is not simply one affair or one suspicious contract, but rather a case study in how government corruption operates most effectively in the modern era. Nebulous job titles provide access without accountability. Special employee designations create loopholes that exempt influential individuals from transparency requirements. Personal relationships become power structures when institutional oversight fails. And public incompetence can actually mask private corruption by keeping attention focused on gaffes and statements rather than the structural arrangements that enable money to flow to connected parties. The Trump administration, according to critics, functions as both an ATM machine and a reality show, and the Noem-Lewandowski situation demonstrates exactly how that works in practice. Someone with campaign connections transitions into a government-adjacent role that provides influence without disclosure requirements. A romantic relationship creates personal dependency that prevents normal accountability measures from functioning, and millions of dollars flow to companies that happen to get meetings arranged by the same person who faces no transparency requirements about his financial interests. Financial disclosure requirements exist for a reason, and that reason is to prevent exactly what appears to be happening at the Department of Homeland Security right now. When the person brokering government contracts worth tens of millions of dollars has no obligation to disclose their financial relationships with the companies receiving those contracts, there is no way for the public or for oversight bodies to determine whether corruption is occurring. The entire system relies on the honor of individuals who have already demonstrated a willingness to lie about their working hours and maintain secret relationships that create obvious conflicts of interest. The American public deserves to know who is actually making decisions at federal agencies, what financial interests those individuals have, and whether contracts worth millions of dollars are being awarded based on merit or based on personal relationships between unaccountable advisors and the companies that stand to benefit. The story of Corey Lewandowski and Kristi Noem is ultimately a story about how accountability gaps in government employment rules can be exploited by those who understand that the appearance of following rules matters more than actually following them, and how personal relationships can become the foundation of power structures that bypass every institutional check designed to prevent corruption. As long as special government employee designations allow individuals to exercise influence without disclosure, as long as romantic entanglements create dependencies that prevent oversight from functioning, and as long as tens of millions of dollars can flow to companies right after meetings are arranged by people with no official authority, this kind of corruption will continue to operate in the space between what is technically legal and what is obviously wrong.